Okay, I think we can start our webinar. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us with another ESMC webinar. My name is Bahar Shahsavari. I'm a PhD student and graduate research assistant at Minnesota Design Center at the University of Minnesota. I'm so happy to be moderating these webinars and learn from our community. As you may know, the ESMC project is a community-centered collaboration with University of Minnesota partners developed to strengthen small communities through the development of resilient infrastructure. Program support includes developing and strengthening project plans for long-term goals, laying groundwork for proposals and funding opportunities, and federal, local, and state investments. We want to provide communities involved or interested in the ESMC program with new and accessible perspective on resilient infrastructure strategies. Our webinar series aims to give a better sense of possibilities with examples from professional experiences in the field and to help communities that face similar challenges share best practices and innovative solutions. Today, we present Redeveloping Two Harbors through design and consensus with our guest speakers, Kjersti Duval, and also Lew Conner, the mayor of Two Harbors. Kjersti brings over 25 years of design and development experience to her current role as a partner and majority owner at Duval, where she specializes in public interest design and development. As the former Minneapolis Planning Director and as the Public Interest Development Lead at Duval, she has successfully guided consequential urban projects to implementation, including the development of downtown East Commons at US Bank Stadium and the Dakota-led restoration at Owamni on the Minneapolis Central Riverfront. Her current focus on the redevelopment of 20 plus acres of waterfront land in Two Harbors was supported by ESMC and adopted by the City of Two Harbors in April 2026. A Harvard Graduate School of Design alumni, she shares her design center development approach as an instructor in urban design at the University of Minnesota, as an affiliate of Minnesota Design Center, and as a resource professional for the U.S. Conference of Mayor nonprofit partner, the Mayor's Institute on City Design. Thank you, Kjersti and Lew, for being with us today. As you may know, we have Q&A session at the end, but please feel free to put your question in the chat or unmute yourself at the end to ask your questions. Kjersti, we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. And I'm just so happy that we can share this back with ESMC. Obviously, just absolutely fundamental to the project. That was the original funding to start moving this project forward. And so thank you so much. And I am joined by Mayor Conner. He has directed me to give this presentation, but he is here at the end for conversation and questions. I think you would find his perspective on this illuminating, and it really does take excellent political leadership and consensus building in government in order to move something of this scale and magnitude forward. So applause to Mayor Conner for also making this happen. So with that, I'll share my screen and we can begin. Oops. Did I share the wrong thing? Sorry, guys. Let's try that again. I thought that was the right one. Of course, I do that when it's recording. I'm selecting the one here, but it's not sharing the right tab. Let me try again. Sorry, folks. I was just sharing it, right?
Yeah, you shared it before we started and it was fine.
I'm selecting the same image and it's just not opening the right one. I'm going to close it and reopen it. let's try that again. Burning my precious time with you guys. Okay, let's see if this time it works. All right,
Yes, you're good.
there we go.
Yeah.
So let's go to slideshow mode. All right, there we go.
Mhm.
What would a webinar be without technical difficulty? Um, So, number one, I think a lot of you probably know Two Harbors, have been through Two Harbors. Many of us go to the North Shore regularly, each summer. But there it is, right on the shores of Lake Superior, a little bit north of Duluth. You can see it there on the map. And what we're talking about is the Two Harbors waterfront at Agate Bay. So about between 20 and 25 acres of formerly industrial waterfront land is being conveyed from the state and specifically from the DNR to the city of Two Harbors. That was a legislative conveyance, and that is the subject of the opportunity. Here's a little bit closer view on that, and so you can see, how substantial, how significant it is as an opportunity to connect the community to its waterfront. And also, the presence of those massive ore docks, which are really spectacular as not only a working piece of the industrial economy, but just as monuments. They are very large. There they are. So it is still a working waterfront, but this very large piece of it has served its purpose and needs a new future. A couple other things about the site. It is the terminal station of the North Shore Scenic Rail. So it's connected to Duluth, a short rail ride away. And of course, it has spectacular views of Lake Superior and that beautiful rocky shoreline. Nearby on the point is that cute little bed and breakfast. Maybe some of you have stayed there. And then on the site itself, there is a path that the community has used for quite some time. It's part of a regional trail system, but that's pretty much the only place on the site that you can go is along that waterfront trail. Here's a couple other views of that, of those large ore docks and that rocky shoreline. In the middle ground on the left, you see a decaying pier. That is an old industrial pier. And on the right, you see another view of that with the fence in front of it because the pier is actually decaying into the water and has created some hazardous conditions. And so this is one of the priority mitigations for a future waterfront development. So, a couple other things just about Two Harbors in terms of its economy. It is the major job center for Lake County. And for that reason, the county and the state should be very invested in Two Harbors' success. And we've built that case as we go out for state funding this year. Additionally, it's the center for all of those essential quality of life assets that are necessary to grow the entire county and regional economy. So it's the home of the medical center, it's the government center for Lake County, it's where the membership organizations are located, and so on. So our local government leaders, Lew Conner is here on the call today. Patty Nordine, if she can join, may join us as well, city administrator. We're really the leading folks from city government. And then at the county level, we were connected to Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District, Kari Hayden, and Matt Johnson, who is the Lake County HRA director. This really constituted the core intergovernmental team moving through this process. And then the project team, it was me, Aubrey Rexstad, also from my company. We worked with co-facilitator Tracy Chaplin at the Regional Sustainability Development Partnership up there, and then collaborated with the city's contract planner, Sarah Swedberg, and the Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District's contract engineer, Tyler Hackett. So it's a large and very professional team. So just want to go through, the first thing we observed in discovery is that the site already had a lot of planning going on. but all with different authors and maybe different motives. And so this idea of alignment and integration became really central to how we proceeded through this planning process. And here you see some of those details. The site in context, this site had been the subject of a DNR vision for a safe harbor project, and you see that in the lower left-hand corner. That did not move forward for numerous reasons that we won't get into here. But when the DNR abandoned that idea, that became an opportunity for the city to finally, literally after decades, take control of its own destiny and its own waterfront and begin this process. Historically, this was the original settlement of the town, and you can see there the original plat and those two kind of broad streets that organized it. The site, became kind of denigrated as Whiskey Row during the growth of industry on the site, and ultimately became owned by industry and became industrial. But that historic settlement, we do hearken back to that in the vision. And features and constraints on the site, we did some mapping about what's out there now. What do we need to be concerned about in terms of historic resources, of which there are several, and also, some of the water infrastructure that required improvement in order to address some pollution. And that's what you see there with the biochar project. The site has wetlands, in fact, many wetlands, some of which are incidental to the industrial use, but some of which are, functioning wetlands that just need a little love. And we also identified some of the greatest concerns in terms of industrial remnant pollution and perched water and other conditions of concern. All of this was work that had already been done and was in myriad plans covering literally decades. So there was a pretty robust literature review to inform the plan. Ultimately, after discovery, the city observed rightly that moving a consolidated plan forward was going to require a lot of input and a lot of consensus building. They formed a waterfront task force, which had voting members as well as coordinating non-voting members. And that task force convened over a series of 6 meetings and invited guests as needed, kind of topic by topic, in order to achieve an actionable plan. So here they are again, looking at those myriad goals and identifying a way forward that would create a consensus. And here you can see a couple of the work sessions and the sounding board and just like pulling as much information as we possibly could from how people use the site and how it could be used in the future. The team also brought our own principles to the project, and we knew that alignment was going to be essential, that we wouldn't end with competing interests. We would end with one shared group rowing together. Readiness was a principle, and that meant we needed to end with an actionable plan, not a plan that could go on a shelf and look really good, but a plan that had elements where we could take a next step toward manifesting them in the real world. And then the third thing was commitment. If an element is in the plan that we'll show you, that means someone is responsible for funding its construction, for operating it, and for maintaining it. And so we needed to move forward a plan that had alignment, readiness, and commitment in order to really make those next steps possible. Because ultimately, creating the plan is the beginning of the process, not the end. And so the plan had to be actionable. So that arc of 6 meetings, you can see here, the visioning happened at the beginning, but right away we got into roles and responsibilities, funding, and commitments. And that was the bulk of the series, was ensuring that as we drew this plan, We were tying a name to it. We were tying responsibility to it. We were understanding the cost and we were understanding its future maintenance. And that conversation was a thread throughout. So to present the plan, you can see here that the plan is composed of a number of elements. We did integrate all of those diagrammatic projects. You see all of them here in the rendered final plan, including there was some community monuments. There is that pier restoration and coastal engineering priority of the Soil and Water Conservation District, in addition to their wetland and habitat goals. And then there is some guided private development, primarily at the edges. So the community monuments included a Veterans Memorial. This is the design that they provided to us, and we included and incorporated into our 3D model. There was an additional community monument for the Edna G, which is just off the screen here, but similarly designed by others, but now incorporated and connected through circulation and views with the rest of the plan. This is the coastal engineering that is, it's really a city and Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District combined effort. And so we worked with the coastal engineer. We brought in all of their work into our model to ensure that the entirety of this effort was designed and connected together. And you can see just up in the left there's the Veterans Memorial. So you can kind of understand them as one place. Here's some ADA accessible fishing piers, similarly from the coastal engineer, but you'll note that we have added some interpretive signage. And so the idea of interpretive signage, making one place out of, 5 ideas, that's one of the ways that this entire place will hang together. And so again, combining. Here's at the waterfront near a new beach and boardwalk feature. And this is just next to the restored pier that is, I guess, out of view in this version. But to the left, you see some tents set up, and that again is part of the improvements that we proposed with the city related to event grounds and active recreation, and you'll see that next. In the distance, you can see the inn, the red inn on the point. The wetlands just needed a little love, as I mentioned, and so we did create, kind of a wetland restoration, wetland park area, and that, provides again signage, interpretation, and ADA accessible park experiences for everyone, as well as our other relatives, the animals, the birds, aquatic species. And the amphitheater and event grounds, again, you see those tents to the left, this incredible view out to Lake Superior. The amphitheater was something that the community, it was kind of high on the list of community needs. And of course, in the future, this piece of the project is going to be a favorite visitor experience. It's going to accommodate an existing group and stakeholder in town who utilizes the existing band shell, and also it'll be, a way for the city to start having revenue that leads to the ability to maintain. Similar to that is the active recreation of ice skating, and you see right there in the background, it's right by where the North Shore Scenic Rail comes into town. This idea of park facilities that are also recreation facilities and potentially have revenues, potentially have convenience concessions and those sorts of things. Again, making it a destination waterfront. And there you see that seasonality, what could you do here in the winter? It's a summer place, it's also a winter place. The interpretive signage locations are preliminary. We actually are currently progressing a grant to do a real interpretive plan. There's an enormous opportunity here for interpretation. So this image just shows you the intent. And now on the implementation side, this is really where it gets interesting because, as I said, the whole purpose of this was not just to create beautiful images and dream of what we would like. It was really about ensuring that the city had the foundation and the strategy in place to carry this forward to implementation. Um, so again, those alignment actions, ultimately the task force and an intergovernmental coordination meeting series, which is still ongoing. That is a regular recurring meeting of the key government partners. Those are the two elements that have ensured and will continue to ensure alignment, coordination, and action. Because as you know, each of these things is going to have to go through a series of approvals. There's a regulatory environment. So those elements of both community support and intergovernmental partnership are crucial to the alignment objective. The commitment, it was essential that we have real commitments from our government partners and also in the future, potential private operators or tenants to ensure that this can actually be realized and brought into existence. So just thinking about commitments related to coordination, that's the first commitment. Can you participate in a recurring standing meeting for the next 3 years? So those folks are at the table. The regulatory issues, do we need zoning updates? Is the city needing to do something? Is the county? Is the state? The infrastructure needs, the funding needs, the pre-development work, and the operations and maintenance. All of those things needed to be understood, and the parties at the table saying, yes, like this is important enough to me. I'm going to commit my time, my staff, my resources. And that's what we did. So we have secured commitments, and you see there on the bottom, the City of Two Harbors, Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District, and Lake County, and specifically Lake County HRA, are all actively at the table and carrying responsibilities. And so, we often talk about the public sector leads, and the public sector makes these catalytic investments, and then the private sector responds. And you see that again and again and again. You will see that in this case as well, where these transformative investments are made by the city and the county, and in the future, the private sector will respond. And some of that private response will be guided private development. And then the final objective of readiness, we created a consolidated plan, and it's on the city's story map site for Two Harbors waterfront if you wanted to look at the plan in full. And having that consolidated plan as a document, as a record, as a strategy, and having that be the foundation for then actions that can follow on was really, really important. And so, an adopted plan gives confidence to future funders like the state grant funding, or it gives confidence to future partners in public-private partnerships, knowing that the city has formally adopted a plan and that plan is in action. It helps us to build momentum, and that is exactly what we're doing. So just a little bit more deep dive on implementation. We looked at this as kind of three components, three district components. The waterfront, yes, there's a park, but in addition to the park, we really wanted to think about streetscapes and infrastructure as well as new private development. And, all together, you really need all of that together in order to create a there. And so we did look at it as kind of three buckets. Each of those also has a different path to implementation. And so the implementation paths that we identified, of course, I've used this term a few times, guided private development. That's the kind of development in the two orange spots on the map that you see, which are noted guided private development. Those are city owned. So you can envision, express what it wants to achieve there. It could issue a really detailed RFP. It's going to have financial goals associated with those sites and with other guided private development. And so, those are very much a part of how is the place a place and how do the abutting buildings and structures contribute to placemaking. The next implementation path is the city-led improvements, and those are basically the public parkland. You can see the dark green area is general parkland. In addition to that, there's a light green color, and that one is called city-led with selected partner. Those are going to be opportunities for partnership where the city owns the asset, but there is an opportunity for a private concession or a private operator to come in. And you think about, there's two really good examples, like the Loppet Foundation at Theodore Wirth Park, working with the Minneapolis Park Board, or the concessions that the National Park Service often utilizes within national parks, whether it's lodging or restaurants, and those kinds of recreational experiences. So, the general parkland is one thing. The light green, those are opportunities for revenue, for activation, and for programming. And they will be implemented in a different way from the general parkland. The next category is community-led monuments, and those, the Edna G. Tugboat and the Veterans Memorial, those are both owned by individual nonprofits, community and citizen nonprofits. They are doing their own fundraising, they have their own design. And so our role on those is really to coordinate, ensure that the circulation is connected, and support. And so those are features that would be included in interpretive signage and talking about the place, but again, led by the community. And finally, there's city and county coordinated improvements. That's the blue. And so you'll see really those are the environmental aspects of the project. So restoring those wetlands that really had been left to their own devices during an industrial period can now be really amplified and built up into something of value both to people and habitat. And then the coastal engineering and kind of making the repairs that allow that waterfront to be accessible, that restore that historic pier, which is such a cool opportunity, and create a there right at the water's edge. So, the coastal engineering and the wetland, that's on city-owned land, but the city is really looking to a government partner who specializes in environmental restoration, and that's the Soil and Water Conservation District. And so that partnership allows a shared vision, but for the funding pursuits, the engineering and management duties to be shared, that it's not all on the city. And so looking at it that way, you start to also understand that this leads you not only to different implementation actors and leadership opportunities, but also different funding sources. So the experience of passive recreation on the coastal edge, that's going to have maybe a different funding source than the activities and events zone with the amphitheater, the ice skating, and the park concessions. There might be a unique funder for the interpretive areas. There might be a unique funding for the wetlands and habitat. And that's exactly how we've structured it. So each of these experiences and each of these implementation roles lead us to a very clear sense of where are we going for funding and how are we coordinating moving these things into to construction. So the 2026 goals in action, Um, we are completing the state to local conveyance. Obviously that's important and underway. We are pursuing those initial funds, and so right now the funding pursuits are related to additional soft costs, the planning for construction. But in order to get to that point, we did do a rough order of magnitude cost estimate in order to estimate our soft costs and inform those funding pursuits. Uh, and then the city is leading its major pursuit of LCCMR dollars, which is the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. And that's really for those kind of parkland improvements. And the Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District is leading a Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council pursuit, and that would be for the wetland area. And they're pursuing different dollars for the coastal engineering, which is already at 65% design. So those funding pursuits will hopefully result in kind of a next phase of the necessary soft costs starting in mid 2027. That first year is all of the, I would call it all of the even pre-design compliance studies, things like wetland delineation, phase one and phase two environmental, and those sorts of things, and then leading into detailed design and engineering for those initial priority improvements. And so that has all been mapped. We've got a timeline. We know how much each phase will cost. And those funding pursuits have owners and responsible parties. And we meet and talk about them at the Intergovernmental Coordination Group on a regular basis. And so the plan has become actionable, and we are pursuing those next steps. Additionally, the repairs to the pier, we're looking at that a little differently. That it is a federal harbor. You noted those large ore docks. Two harbors is a crucial piece of the national infrastructure. And so that federal harbor means there should be a federal interest in creating the repairs and the mitigation for the unsafe conditions in Lake Superior. So already the mayor has been to DC. This is on the radar of our congressional representatives, and advocacy for congressionally directed spending is planned, not this year, but next year, and we'll be ready for that. In addition to that, mission-aligned grants have been identified. I mentioned the other pursuits by the Soil and Water Conservation District. There's additional grants that have been identified, but the great thing about the plan that we made is it really is organized and compartmentalized into very, very easy buckets to find a funder and to move it forward with an owner and a responsible party. And so those things are underway. And then, looking ahead, how do we get to construction and operations readiness? That's a financial wherewithal question. It's also kind of let's call it, moving toward guided development, moving toward public-private partnership. Those are threads that we are still weaving, even though there's intention. There's more to do. Those guided private development sites, what will they be? We had some ideas. The task force had some ideas. It's not determined yet, and that is, a few years out. So really getting our heads around, how to guide those sites, what is going to be the best contributing use at those locations, and are there other locations that we might need to consider? And then finally, the updates to the capital improvement plans. We have identified our priority infrastructure improvements. The city's public works director has been in those meetings, has expressed excitement. So we know that at both the city and county level, updating those CIPs is going to be, one of the tasks ahead. And ultimately, that brings us to conclusion, and over a period of, I would say, um, you know, 5 years, hopefully everything has a home, everything has an implementation path, and everything has a funding strategy. And I'm doing a time check here. It looks like I have about 10 minutes left. So I'm 10 minutes ahead of schedule, and I can just leave you here with the consolidated site plan. And maybe if we do have just a few minutes left, Mayor, did you want to share anything?
Sure, I can, if you, yes, I will. First of all, thank you, Kjersti, for all the work that you've done on this. It's been an interesting 3 years since the conveyance was first announced. And we've had a variety of different, as Kjersti mentioned, we had a variety of different planners early on. I want to just start with a group that was called the Friends of the Waterfront, and they used a grant from the Citizens Institute for Rural Design. A young resident by the name of Jolene Brink um, was one who led that effort, and that really got all of this started. It was a small grant, but it started out by meeting on a regular basis, having some community planning type meetings to get a foundation built that we could improve on, and then evolve to where we are today. So there were a lot of efforts, both from the citizens as well as from Lake County Soil and Water along the coast as well. So all of this accumulating into this final plan really kept us moving forward. So that I'm very appreciative of all the work that the entire group has done.
Yeah, that's a good point. The CERD process was still underway when we started in our discovery period, and one of the task force principles was to carry that work forward. And so we adopted the principles of that CERD process, which was a major community visioning effort led by Jolene.
Okay, thank you so much, Kjersti, and also Mayor Lew Conner, for sharing your experience about Two Harbors project. If we have any questions from the audiences, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Kjersti, thank you so much for presenting your work, and it's great to see the integration of historic sites and ecological restoration. And I'm curious about sort of zooming out in the eastern part of the site, and if you and your community team have had conversations about that, or maybe that's for future project development.
When you say the eastern part of the site, can you say a bit more?
Yeah, toward the shoreline.
Where the building was, the inn, the bread and breakfast inn.
Oh, yeah, the point.
The point.
Yeah, the point. I don't know if Patty is here or maybe Mayor Conner could speak to that, because that, of course, it came up numerous times, but it was really not part of our work. So, Mayor, do you want
Sure,
to take that?
sure. Well, where that extends to is to Burlington Bay, and there are any walking trails that are part of that, and it goes all the way out to an area outside of town. The to to not to correct Kjersti, but the Red Bed and Breakfast is actually a functional lighthouse. Um, so that's an important landmark within the town itself. So, but that area, yes, there's plans for development, but we focused on mainly the Agate Bay area for this project, and it'll lead into the other areas. We already have Lakeview Park that's over near that other area. We have walking trails. We have benches and monuments kind of in that area. It's still rough, and the Agate Bay waterfront will be much more spectacular than that. But we do eventually we'll focus on upgrading that as well, I'm sure.
Kjersti, hi, great work. I wondered about the funding. You mentioned the LCCMR grant. Are there also federal funds that you think might be available from EPA or others?
Yeah, we are pursuing. I mean, we think a great match would be congressionally directed spending through community project funding, because that, we have a supportive congressional delegation, and it should be a priority for them, just because the U.S. Army Corps is there and because of the conditions in the water. So that would be the best case scenario, because you don't have to match those dollars. And that, I mean, that's the biggest ticket item out there. So we really like that one. If we did go the route of more of an EPA grant, those are pretty big efforts, and a lot of complexity. And honestly, we'd probably want to hire someone who specializes in federal grant pursuits. But if we have to, we will, right, Mayor?
Yeah.
But hopefully it's an appropriation.
The other thing that we have had from a federal funding standpoint through the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, some GLRI funding has been
Right.
focused through here for our coastal resiliency grants that are helping us. That one of the ones that got us to the 65% engineering design. Those funds came through, in this case, through NOAA, but it was also GLRI funding. So that's part of when I went to Washington that were made sure that the representatives and senators were going to fund that again, and we were successful. It appears that's going to continue to happen. But then they also had a chance to put on the table, on the radar for next year, because this year we were working on some different congressional direct spending. But while I was there, I also started out for next year, which would be that the more waterfront funding from direct spending as well. Those are always hit and miss, but you got to keep pushing it early and often.
I mentioned the EPA because the Minneapolis Foundation has this EPA grant, $50 million EPA grant that they're actually trying to spend as quickly as possible, and that might be another source to pursue.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
Look into that. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean Lou mentioned the coastal engineering. So yeah, I mean, that's right. Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District, I think we mentioned, they had already achieved 65% design on the coastal engineering. And that was an amazing leap forward, to just have something to tie into already.
And we did get selected for the next round of that. There were three projects picked for a $1.6 million grant. I'm sorry, $1.2 million grant that we're sharing the funding on this, and the contracts are about to be signed on that, and it will take us to the 90% engineering design for all this work that was done earlier, and that's where Tyler Hackett from Dewberry did most of the engineering work for that 65%. But we've been selected to get that to 90% as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just jump in just to formally recognize all those champions that Kjersti got to pull together. Did a masterful job, Kjersti, because Two Harbors historically has been a challenging community, right, Mayor?
We've had our ups and downs.
And the mayor has been just consistent and supportive throughout this whole thing, the city council. So there's just a whole countless number of champions that, of course, are essential for making this project possible. So hands off to all of the folks in the team and in the community and the leadership to keep it going. So anyway, congrats.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. And for anyone who doesn't know David, he was right there with us at every step as well. He leads the regional sustainability development partnerships up there, Northeast. So thank you, David.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any other question from audiences? If not, maybe I can ask my question. You mentioned at the beginning that you have community engagement workshops to kind of work with the community about how they use the site and how the site would be in the future. I would like to know, as a team of designer, what was the challenges that you have during that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of consensus about some things. I mean, I think everyone was really there was 100% consensus that the fence needs to come down and the water needs to be safe, you know. So
Mhm.
you know, of course. And then there was some push and pull between, you know, folks who really wanted destination qualities and others who wanted restoration qualities. And so, you know, that was a conversation. And I think we actually got to a really good and balanced place on that. You know, it started off almost like, you know, two football teams facing off on the field. And then as we moved through the process, and it became evident that you can't have all restoration when you're asking the city to take on the care of a 20-acre park. I mean, there needed to be some way for there to be active uses, revenues, and kind of a business case to then feel like you have the financial wherewithal to maintain it. And so, you know, as we moved into more of the practicalities of you know, a town of 3,600 taking on a very large park, you know, that it started to make sense to people that this was a balanced strategy. And really, like, you know, the task force set those principles at the beginning. One of the principles was public interest, and we were really clear that public interest doesn't just mean you know, parks, it also means financial wherewithal. You know, you've got it is in the public interest for the city to make fiscally responsible decisions. And owning and maintaining a large park is a big deal. So how do we do it? And that really created a much more balanced view, I think, on both sides. And Mayor, I don't know if you have anything else you would want to add to that, but we got there.
No, not a lot to add. I will say when we first started with the Friends of the Waterfront, the CERD project, it was all focused only on outdoor recreation, and we failed a little bit there to involve more of the business side of things. So being able to get that input into the evolving process was important and helped significantly. And as Kjersti keeps mentioning, this is going to be a big park, and it takes a significant amount of dollars to maintain a park like that. So we have to figure out a way that we can do that.
Thank you so much. And how many workshops do you have for that part with the community?
Um, are you talking about the CERD process or our continued process?
The whole yeah, I want to know that my question is more about the process of the community engagement. At what point the community was engaged, and how long in the process they continued to be engaged.
I can't speak to the CERD process because they did a lot of community visioning before we started. And so, but what we adopted from that process, it was kind of the principles. I think some of the elements or the park features that were in that plan ultimately, you know, either shifted or you know, like there was no amphitheater and there was no some of the features maybe evolved, I would say, but the principles remained exactly as they were. And there were kind of community priorities that we literally just pulled into our process with the task force. We did our own community meetings. We met with a group of citizens. We met with more the business community as well, like separately, so that we were kind of hearing the economic side of things, and we were also hearing the community experience. You know, I walk my dog, or it's important to me that we have a healthy environment. You know, so those meetings we did early on, but those were supplemental to like a year-long process or something like that that had already happened. So when we then moved on to the task force, that was 6 meetings of the task force, and each of those meetings was the appointed task force as well as invited, I'll just call them invited guests who represented specific perspectives that were really important, where we knew we needed to have buy-in and we weren't going to be able to make a decision and carry it forward without a certain constituency buying in and agreeing. And so each of those meetings was its own little crucible of discussion and decision making with key players.
That's
Thank
great.
you. Yeah.
I should mention that Barbara is doing her PhD on community engagement and how to improve these processes, which is probably why she had her questions. But we are, as a center, trying to always learn from great projects like this about how you did it, how you brought communities together, and how you did the community engagement process. So it was that, in addition to the great design, that process sounds like it was really successful. Yeah.
It was, yeah. I think we
Yeah.
got it.
And
Yeah.
I will say for the CERT process that was done early, they did have 2 open community events where we probably had 60 or 70 community members come into each of them to provide feedback and input. So it did start from the grassroots level, even making sure the community was involved. Again, it focused more on the environmental side and the outdoor recreation there. And then, as Kjersti said, we were able to get the business community, the commercial side in as things evolved.
Yeah. And now that I think about it, Mayor, we also did some site walks specifically related to the coastal engineering, and
Right.
the DNR was part of that, and the county, and so there were a number of constituencies that were being engaged in different ways. Yeah.
So
I'm
Thank you
also
very much.
interested in the community engagement piece and curious about your kind of philosophy around design principles as a guiding kind of force in driving actionable change. Because you kind of spoke to how things fall apart through the development process, and so I'm curious about how you approach those principles, and then helping to create alignment across the stakeholders through those.
Yeah, I think, and I just took note a little bit ago that Aubrey Rexted has joined the call as well, and she was a big part of the design effort. I mean, she really she collected all of the different priorities and all of the different design concepts that we wanted to incorporate. So that included the coastal engineering work by Dewberry, the 2 community monuments. I mean, they designed those. In those cases, I think it was just heartening to understand that we our role was to integrate and connect to those, and to kind of create a way for this to be one place. And that was true of every feature that we designed was something that the community wanted to be there. And so that was step one. The interpretive intention, the amphitheater, the activation locations and buildings. The design opportunity was a chance to put all of these intentions together and then say, well, what does this feel like? And let's make it feel amazing. Where's the big view? Like, how are people using this space? So I think in terms of design principles, principle number 1 was we're not dropping in and creating a signature design. We are the pencil of the community, and it's our job to create the experience that they're committed to in a way that is implementable, functional, and beautiful, and to help come up with the back end of like, this isn't just an idea. This can be built, this can be operated, and this can be maintained. So that design was a skill that we brought. And I don't know, Aubrey didn't really introduce herself. Aubrey, do you want to say a word or two about your experience pulling that coordinated plan together and doing some renderings? Is Aubrey
Yeah,
still here?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh yeah, there she is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Aubrey Rexstad, the project coordinator for urban design with Kjersti. Um, just like one thing to add on for carrying the design principles all the way through, after each of our 6 meetings, it was basically like workshopping with everybody on the task force and community members to continue their ideas throughout the entire process. So like with the amphitheater and the different locations of where everything was placed, it was after the discovery phase of like finding out where things can go based off the environmental factors. We took into account everybody's considerations and just did a very iterative process for throughout the 6 months. So that was like kind of how we carried through the design principles. And we had some really good people a part of the task force, making sure that we had accessibility at the forefront for design, um, making sure that people were able to like walk their dogs um, on these paths that would be accessible for everyone. So really just making sure that our voices weren't the ones that were the loudest, and it was just uplifting everybody else's voices that were in the community to make sure it's because it's for them. So yeah.
Yeah. And
That's
that
beautiful.
oh, I
Sorry.
was going to add to like Aubrey just struck a memory because the amphitheater, rose up as a priority and so yeah, like she was saying, what's the best location for it? And so you saw the rendering, this spectacular view, this spectacular Lake Superior view, and there is one opportunity with a natural bowl on the site. And it happened to be that that natural bowl was directly, behind the pier. And so that became just a really achievable place to put this major program. And so having, kind of having the reality of the site and having, the business end, okay, those are we're considering those, but now how do we really make that beautiful? How do we make that an experience? And so that's, I think you saw, I mean, it turned out really well.
I'll just add one more thing too. So everyone that was on the task force kind of represented a larger group of people, and they carried those ideas from everyone that they talked to in between every single meeting. So the last meeting was a public open house where we had probably like 70 people come and view the plan. And because we started the entire process with the design principles, with people from the public representing those larger groups at the start, once it got to the public open house, there wasn't a whole lot of like opposition to it because everyone from the community was talking about these and sharing their ideas to make sure everything was getting incorporated that people wanted brought to the forefront of the design. So it was really good feedback at the last meeting, and not too much that we ended up having to change after from letting the whole public view.
Final thing on design. I also recall, to what Aubrey just said in one of the task force meetings, just asking, like, Aubrey had prepared a few renderings, and we kind of looked through them, but we had a conversation about what stories the community wanted to tell through these images. I mean, we're talking about experiences, we're talking about stories. And so like having those renderings reflect the stories that told community priorities, that that meant that we were really focusing our design effort and where to develop the model and where to develop the concepts on the stories the community wanted to tell. And that's exactly kind of how that went. And so I think, Aubrey put a lot of time and attention into the stories that the task force thought were important to tell. And those are also, you will note, where we need to raise money and build things and operate things. And so it all kind of hangs together. Those images become associated with funding pursuits. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, everybody who joined us. We're at the time. I hope we don't have any other questions, but I don't think so. Okay, thank you so much for everybody who joined us, and also
Thank you, guys.
Kjersti and Mayor Lew for sharing your experience with us.
Thanks for
Have a
having
good
us.
rest of your day.
Wow. Thank you.